Hello, and welcome back to the second episode of That Air Cargo Girl in Conversation. This show is all about connecting with professionals across the air freight and air cargo industry. We'll share insights, offer advice for those looking to join the sector, and discuss market trends and developments within our professional network here in the UK. I'm your host, Jazz Gallimore-Cox, though most of you probably know me as That Air Cargo Girl from LinkedIn and TikTok. I'm relatively new to the industry and currently working as a business development manager within a GSA. I'm also on the committee for Heathrow's Young Forwarder Network with BIFA and helping to develop a new young professionals networking group with UCAC. In today's episode, I sit down with Matt Croser, a seasoned industry professional with memberships in the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, the Institute of Export and International Trade, and the Corporate Governance Institute. As Head of Global Development at Britam, Matt is responsible for driving international business growth, fostering strategic partnerships, and optimising supply chains to support global expansion. Beyond his corporate role, Matt is a passionate advocate for sustainability. He serves on the CILT's Environment and Sustainability Forum, where he champions greener logistics and sustainable supply chain strategies. Something we'll be diving into in this episode. As always, you can follow me for more on Instagram and TikTok at That Air Cargo Girl, or connect with me on LinkedIn, where most of you know me best. Without further ado, let's get into the episode. We're at episode 2. I can't believe we're here, Matt. So thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
So I think the best thing for us to do is to tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and how you came to be in the air cargo industry.
Okay. Well, I fell into air cargo, much the same as the majority of people my age. I was looking for a job post A-levels. I wanted a year out before going to university. Lived near the airport, and there was hundreds of jobs in air freight. So I thought, well, that will do for 12 months. And 12 months later, I was enjoying earning a salary, didn't want to go to university anymore, and carried on.
Wow.
So I started as a post-flight clerk, doing manual customs entries, manual post-flights, manual filing, like it used to be 24 years ago. And just slowly grew through the industry, changed companies, experienced different things, so small companies, larger companies, multinationals, and got to where I am today, which is looking after the air product at Britam Shipping, as well as the global development of the company, and doing work with the CILT on environment and sustainability.
Fantastic. And that's obviously why we're here today, to talk about sustainability and what you get up to with the CILT. So I guess I want to know what sparked your interest in sustainability, having come into the industry, kind of worked away. When did you kind of get into sustainability and what kind of sparked that interest for you?
Honestly, probably only about 7 or 8 years ago. When I joined the industry, it was very much back of a fag packet quoting. It was a bit of a boys' club. There was a lot of negotiations done in pubs.
Yeah.
and sustainability was a word that no one really understood. And I think for the majority of my career, people have looked at air cargo and sustainability and said the two aren't compatible. It's much easier to carbon reduce a slower form of transport. Whereas, as we know, air cargo is for red hot urgent goods, it's a priority.
Yeah.
Therefore, anything that's going to slow that down is counterproductive. So it was something that was really ignored. And it really, about 7, 8 years ago, I had a conversation with a couple of different people about what people were doing within the industry, and it just interested me. Suddenly, it wasn't a big picture. It was, what can we do that's smaller, that makes an impact? What changes can we make that are going to be tangible? And it kind of grew from there.
That's incredible. I think, it's really interesting to kind of see where your kind of spark and interest for that, and that actually it wasn't big picture, it was something really small, and trying to think about the small things you can do to impact on what's such a big topic right now.
Well, I think realistically, we can't influence the type of aircraft that you use. We can't influence the type of fuel that goes into that aircraft. That's for other people to discuss. And if we focus on that as a focal point, we're going to walk away from the topic entirely and say, well, there's nothing I can do, so I'll wait for someone else to do that.
That's it, right? And then you're constantly waiting for someone else to do something.
Exactly. And then we all sit there and say, why doesn't someone do something about this? Now, What we can do is much the same as individuals at home. When you look at what we do with recycling at home, where we have like 2 or 3 different bins, they're small changes. Now, those individuals who keep to that are making a difference. It might be microscopic, but collectively it turns into a big change.
That's it, it's the snowball effect, right?
It's about following that through really into the air cargo industry.
Okay. So I guess we've kind of touched a little bit, but I'm keen to know from your point of view, what is the biggest, or what do you think is the biggest challenge right now surrounding sustainability and getting people involved in this kind of conversation?
Well, it's exactly what we just discussed. It's not looking, I mean, the biggest issues are always going to be fuel dependency, high emissions. We all know the carbon footprint of going on holiday, just being on that plane, let alone putting 10 tonne of cargo on that plane. We can't adapt that. We can't change that. Airlines are bringing in things such as SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, but we can't influence that. And that's the biggest challenge, is getting people to ignore that part of it and focus on what you can do, such as electrification of fleets, both in the UK at origin and destination. Try and use partners who use electrified fleets. Use e-airway bills, don't print so much. I mean, these are all conversations that have been going on for 20 years, but if you actually put it into practice, using electronic data as opposed to physical paper, and from a personal perspective, I find that hard. I've been in this industry for nearly 25 years. I grew up in the industry where you were told to print everything out, have copies of everything.
It is bizarre, isn't it, to think of a day where we used to print absolutely everything. And I don't know that myself, being new to the industry, trying to be more digital. And
well, I remember when we first brought in paperless filing. And I said, well, that's never going to work, because I need 100 pieces of paper for every file. I need to be able to reference my paperwork. The first lesson I was ever taught by my first supervisor was read your paperwork, and that meant print it and read it. So adapting from that was a real culture shock for me, and to be honest, probably still is. But it's just changing the way we operate, and it doesn't make a financial impact. Actually, not printing is a reverse. Companies are going to save money by not buying paper, not buying ink.
Exactly.
And if it's paperless filing, you're not storing your files. Exactly. So you don't have to have a room full of filing boxes. You're not paying for that room.
So there's a cost saving there as well as a sustainability.
Exactly. And this is what, through the CILT, this is what we're trying to promote. It's not go out and spend a fortune, go out and save the planet. We're not sort of banging a drum like Greta Thunberg, for example, where you've got to change everything that you do. One of the buzzwords we're using at the moment is small is beautiful.
I like that. Oh, that's nice.
But small changes, if everybody makes small changes, the impact's much, much greater. And then while we're looking at larger parts of the industry, looking at types of aircraft, types of aviation fuel, they're going to do that. We can't impact that. But let's do our little bit. And then when that does come in, it's going to be a much more impactful change. I think there's nothing worse than if an airline brought on hydrogen-powered aircraft and the industry said, that's great, but we're still using diesel to deliver to the plane, still using diesel to deliver to the end user.
That's it, right? The two don't kind of correlate.
Not really.
It's a little bit right now with the ULEZ zone around Heathrow. You've got the ULEZ zone around Heathrow, and we still got these massive jets taking off and putting all these emissions into the air. And it's kind of like one juxtaposes the other. Oh,
100%. And I do feel for people who get a ULEZ fine driving through Heathrow when you've got a 747 taking off 200 yards away. But it's just about getting society prepared for what's going to happen in 20, 30 years. We are going to run out of fuel. Whether you believe in climate change, whether you don't believe in climate change, is a bit of an irrelevance. We're going to run out of fuel. And when we run out of fuel, we have to be prepared for the change. Or, in particular, the air cargo industry will just fall off a cliff.
Exactly. So we've got to do something now to kind of, everybody's talking about net zero by 2050. How are we going to get there and how are we going to make those changes so that we don't get to a point where we have no fuel and we can't operate that side of the industry?
100%. I mean, net zero has been spoken about for as long as I can remember. And I think originally it was 2030. Then it got pushed back. Then it got pushed back. I remember being at school and I was told that coal and oil were going to run out by 2050, 2060. And that's
Wow.
and I was thinking, well, I'm going to be ancient by then. Who cares? And someone else is going to fix that.
Exactly.
We're at 2025 and no one's fixed it. So we are running out of time. And we do need to see that sea change. And that starts really with people on the ground. Mm-hmm. The easiest solution people keep coming up with is, well, don't use air, let's go by ocean, let's go by rail. That's not feasible for certain products.
Exactly. We all know that there's time critical shipments, AOG, we've got pharma, some perishables that need to be moved quickly. So there's always going to be a need for the speed of air cargo is going to be required. It can't be solved by going by ocean or rail.
Exactly. So. And if it's pharmaceuticals or perishable goods, it's got to go on an aircraft, or therefore it won't be fit for purpose at the end. The end user doesn't want to pay more. So quite the opposite. At the moment, the end user's complaining about the price of everything. So if we increase the price of carriage by saying, well, this is now sustainable, we're doing the world a favour, your goods have gone from costing £2 to £5, people aren't going to be happy with that. So it's finding subtle changes that don't necessarily fiscally impact the supply chain that move us towards where we want to be, ideally by 2050.
Exactly, and you're completely right there. As a consumer, at the end of that supply chain, saying that our goods are going to increase because of increased costs for sustainability, most people are going to not want to take that impact. There are some people that are very into sustainability and will accept, that actually getting my Amazon delivery now costs £5 more than it did because it's more eco-friendly. There are a majority of people that just want it cheap, and that does impact our supply chain and all the way through it as well.
I think even down to supermarkets. I mean, we saw a hike in prices post-Brexit due to the supply chain having to adapt. Now, if we adapt the supply chain further and say the cost of fuel is going to go up because we're now using sustainable fuel, so the brie you were buying at £1.50, that after Brexit went to £2.50, is now going to cost you £4.50. People won't wear that, and I understand that. And as much as I do believe in a sustainable supply chain, I don't want to pay more for what I buy either. So
no, exactly. So I guess the challenge comes around the small things and what can we do. So you kind of touched on electric vehicles from end delivery and end destination. What are you doing and how are you finding electric alternatives in your supply chains?
I think ironically, we're seeing more of it in China and Southeast Asia. So if we talk about imports to the UK, looking at the UK as a whole, we're talking 80% imports, 20% exports. So what we're seeing from Southeast Asia is a definite move towards electrifying the fleet, moving away from the images that we all see of the ancient trucks pumping out clouds of diesel. In the UK, again, when we're seeing a move towards it, fleet electrification is a big thing at the moment. But I think as an industry, we need to support that and we need to encourage people to move towards it. There's an agenda not just to create an environmental, sustainable future, but people can also use it as a PR, as an individual company. Look what we're doing.
Exactly.
And it doesn't cost any more. People are going to electrify their fleets. We're not going to charge you any more for it. But your end product is now a greener
product.
Exactly.
I guess what I will say is, what challenges are there with the electrification? Obviously, there's the lack of infrastructure within the UK. So
massively. I mean, there is a cost implication. So if you're looking at hauliers changing from diesel to electric fleets, they've got to buy new vehicles. There's a cost implication there. Charging points. Anyone who drives a Tesla knows that there aren't enough charging points anywhere in the country. And we need to address that. And that is being addressed slowly. But again, I think we've got to be realistic. Everything costs money. And all we ever hear from the government is there isn't enough money. And realistically, there are other challenges that people want to try and solve. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight. But again, like I said, it's supporting hauliers who want to change towards that, supporting the industry to move towards that as an end goal.
That's it. And it's the overall kind of everybody's trying to meet this end goal of being more sustainable, trying to work towards net zero in 2050. Whether that happens, I'm not so sure. Whether that date will get pushed back, but it's how do we, if people want to go more greener, how do we do that, and how do we support those companies and those businesses that want to take on those financial costs into the electrification? I think it's brilliant. I guess it's just certain challenges.
There are costs, but we were told that diesel was going to be phased out by 2030. That's highly unlikely that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I can't see that happening in 5 years' time.
I don't think it's going to. But we know that's a end goal for diesel. So logically, that's going to be electric that replaces that. And it's just working with people who are being proactive on that. I do have sympathy for hauliers. Like I said, it's going to be a massive cost to change your fleet. And ultimately, I think we're going to have to be looking at subsidies to help firms do that.
Exactly right. We all know that, the stats of the amount of hauliers that have gone bust in the last kind of 3-4 years. And then if they're taking on additional costs to electrify their fleet, are shippers, are freight forwarders going to pay more for those services because they are greener and more sustainable, or is it still going to be a race to the bottom? Are we still going to find hauliers that are going bust?
I think ultimately, long term, there should be less cost. The initial outlay for a fleet obviously is astronomical, but you're not buying diesel, you're just charging. So the fuel cost will be lower with those vehicles. So it's just about how that offset works. Again, we don't want to see costs hiked anywhere in the supply chain because it affects the end product. It's just about how we get there. It's about having conversations, and it's about thinking not necessarily 2 weeks down the line, but maybe 10 years down the line. Where do we want to be, and how are we going to get there?
That's it. It's more big picture.
Exactly.
And that's why it's great to have conversations like this, so that we can kind of think about the big picture and trying to get more people thinking about sustainability and joining the conversation. In kind of your world, are there any products or any particular types of cargo that you're working on, or that you think we can kind of make more sustainable, make changes in?
As I've already if we're looking at individual products, pharma, perishable, are all AOG, as we've touched on, they're all going to be priority, and therefore people are going to step outside potentially of a more sustainable supply chain to ensure that the time critical is covered.
Yeah.
If we look at the supply chain in its entirety, packaging is the obvious one. But we still see single-use packaging. We need to try and move away from that. But there's no particular product that makes it harder. I think it's, whether we look at pharma, whether we look at AOG, what's the difference between an AOG and a normal box of plastic straws, for example?
Exactly.
No difference. We're still moving something from A to B. So the challenge might be greater in the fact that the time restraints are on it. But ultimately, again, if we run out of diesel, you can't pick your AOG up on a diesel van. So there's got to be, whatever we change is going to work across the board.
And that's great, right? I think that's the thing that we all can be focused on, is that actually if we can make these changes, every single product and everything that we export, everything that we move via air cargo is going to be more sustainable. It's not going to be that one product or one service is going to lag behind.
It's almost the opposite of the conversations we're having now, where people are saying, I'd like to use a SAF flight. You can't pick and choose. It doesn't quite work like that. But it's going to be in reverse. So people saying, I need it there quickly. Well, okay, but the plane is the plane. The fuel is the fuel.
Exactly.
And this is where we are.
This is where we are. So I guess you're heavily involved with the Sustainability Forum with the CILT.
Yep.
How are you taking that conversation back within Britam and what you're doing? How are you changing things within your own organisation?
I mean, what we do with the CILT and the ENS Forum, it's an opportunity for people from different sectors to get together and discuss what they're doing. So on that forum, we have people who deal heavily in pharma. We have people from Network Rail. We have people from the defence sector. We have people who are working with electrifying fleets. We have people who are dealing with tram networks.
Wow.
So it's learning from what different areas of the world, not necessarily air freight, are doing. There's been a big drive over the last couple of years with rail on ocean. So Southampton Port in particular is really pushing rail as not the final mile, but the pre-final mile movement.
Exactly.
Let's move it by rail to a much closer location, and then it will be a truck for the final
mile.
Your true final mile delivery. For air freight, we don't really see that. I'm not sure of the feasibility of it. We're talking about much smaller goods, and therefore doing it by rail is going to add a lot of time.
Yeah. So
it's what we learn really from mindsets. Defence is the biggest one as an eye-opener for us. What are the MOD doing?
It's interesting. I would never even...
But obviously they have a supply chain as well,
Exactly.
and they're a government department, the Ministry of Defence.
Yeah.
So what are they doing to fit in? And there's some interesting things coming out of those conversations. It's really collaboration. It's learning what other people are doing, what ideas other people have had, and then we project that to a wider audience through webinars, seminars. We're looking currently at potentially doing a seminar at multimodal.
Okay, fantastic.
Around that, and pulling in people from sectors that you and I may not automatically think of when we're dealing with air freight or even ocean freight.
It's that different mindset, right? That they have, and they approach a situation or a supply chain issue from a completely different angle than we might through kind of air freight. And actually we can learn from what they do.
Exactly, and what they do could be adapted for us. It may not work for us. It may be, it opens a new conversation about a third solution that might work. And it's just about everyone speaking. We as I said, no one wants any solution to cost money. And
it'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Well, the realism is we are all in this industry because we like to have a job, and to have a job we've got to be paid, and therefore we've got to make money. So we need to ensure that the changes we make don't drive companies under, that people aren't desperately scrabbling to remain commercially viable whilst pursuing a sustainable future. There has to be a middle ground there.
Exactly.
And it's encouraging people to look for that. I don't want to use the phrase quick and easy, but the small changes.
Exactly.
That we,
as you said, it's the small and the beautiful, right?
Exactly. Small is beautiful. If you can make a small change that doesn't cost you any money, that helps the supply chain to be ever so slightly less carbon dependent, then you're winning. And it doesn't have to be a massive, showy solution that you come up with.
That's it. I think it's really nice to, if we can, as an industry as a whole, talk more about the small things that we can do. I think then everybody can take those small ideas, and if everybody made those small changes, it would have a wider and bigger impact.
Oh, 100%. 100%. It's like I said, if you're a small freight forwarder, you might employ 10 people. You're not going to change the world. It's not going to happen. But if you change some of your practices and everybody follows the same, not only are you making an instant difference with the practice changes, but you're also opening that conversation even wider. Okay, well, we've achieved A. What's B?
Exactly.
And then we see a snowball effect.
Yeah. So I guess if you were talking to a freight forwarder that had about 10 people in their company, what small things would you suggest they did in terms of their sustainability?
Well, there's 101 things that you can do. So we're talking about paper reduction is the obvious one. Try and move towards paperless filing. E-airway bills. Stop printing 8 sheets of paper for every airway bill you produce. That's an instant change, and it's a change that won't cost any money. A slight software change potentially for e-airway bills. The rest of it is going to be free, and you're potentially going to save a bit of money not buying in reams and reams of paper.
Exactly.
Which just walk out the door. Is
there any challenges around e-airway bills, and some airlines accepting, some airlines not accepting? I don't think we're quite 100% there with the airway bill.
We're not 100% there. Again, this is a conversation that I first spoke about probably 20 years ago. I remember going to seminars when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah, genuinely. When I first got in the industry, I remember BA used to, we're going to move to e-airway bills, and we're going to be paperless. And we're now a quarter of a century on, and still we haven't got 100% of carriers on board with this. But I think we're at a point now, the majority of carriers are there. The majority of carriers accept the airway bills. I think everybody sees it as we said, a small, beautiful change.
Yep.
That we can instigate easily. It's achievable for any size company. And that's the obvious change I think we need to see in the industry. Let's get away from paper. That's step one.
That's a quick, dare I say it, a quick win.
It should be. It should be.
It should be, in theory.
We're not going to name and shame carriers who aren't accepting airway bills, but it should be a quick and easy win. There's always going to be cases where you need to provide paper. It might be original documentation. It could be certificates of origin. There are some countries who only accept original copy airway bills. That's fine. Let's try and do the majority, and we can work on the smaller ones moving forward.
Exactly. That's it. If we can get the kind of majority and we can maximise that paperless and the airway bills, then the minimal minority, it balances.
Yeah, it balances, and you never know that in future people may adapt to that as well. That's the hope. But it's the small changes, again, partnering with people who offer electrified fleets. That's an easy one. Again, it shouldn't make a particular cost difference to the product you're offering, but you can market that. And people need to see that as well. It's not just a selfless act. You can say to your customers, this is what we're doing as part of a sustainable future within aviation.
Exactly.
And you can have the same conversation we're having now. We can't change the big things, but this is what we're trying to do in the smaller.
Exactly. And that I think it's key is to actually for us as freight forwarders or airlines to actually get involved in the conversation and go, what are we actually doing to be more sustainable, and making sure that that is marketed and is said to the customers so that the customers are aware of what you're doing in terms of sustainability. I mean, I don't know if you've seen, but I've seen platforms that give you your CO2 emissions per shipment.
Yes.
Are you using any software like that?
Yes and no. I mean, as a freight forwarder, we are the middleman. So we react to customers' requirements, we speak to suppliers, and we find a solution, and we provide the solution. So the carbon spend, this isn't absolving myself of blame, but the carbon spend isn't necessarily mine.
Yeah.
Some people want to see that. Some people want to see what the carbon footprint was. I've seen it before where people ask you once, see what the carbon footprint was of a particular movement, never ask again.
Well, that speaks volumes.
But that data's great. I think it's frightening when you actually look at the amount of CO2 that is produced. But what are you going to do with the data? So if you're going to have that data and say, well, we know what our carbon footprint is. Okay, what are we doing? Absolutely nothing. Well, it's pointless, isn't it?
Exactly.
And these are really, really big numbers. There was a big thing recently where people were trying to say, well, we're carbon negative. You're not. No one is carbon negative. It's a made-up word. But what can we do? So the carbon footprint will always be the same. The carbon footprint of a flight from Shanghai to London is what it is. Until we get to the point of sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen, electric-powered aircraft, and we're a long way away from that. What we can change is, as we've said, electrified fleets, use electric vehicles or hydrogen, potentially. Each end of that supply chain, then you're trimming your carbon.
That's it. You're reducing those little bits on that you can't do anything about.
You can't do the big bit.
The big bit, but the small bits around the edges that you can chip away.
You can chip away at the bits around the edges. When you're looking at, people talk about carbon offsetting and putting money into carbon offsetting. Actually look at what it is you're doing. So are you planting trees? Well, what's the resolution there? Potentially you're destroying a viable ecosystem to plant a tree to say you're planting a tree.
And that was always kind of, as I was growing up, was always, okay, right, let's go and plant some trees, and that's going to offset, and that's going to be our sustainability plan, and what we're going to do to offset our carbon is let's go and plant trees. That was always kind of
but
the line.
Again, taking it back to the difference between sustainability and climate change. Take climate change out of the equation. So if you're planting a tree to offset your carbon, great. But what's going to happen in 20 years when you run out of fuel? Those trees are going to be fantastic, but you're still not going to be anywhere further forward.
You haven't solved the problem.
You're delaying the problem.
Yes.
So I'm a big fan of people not planting trees. I'm a big fan of people putting the money they're spending on planting trees into sustainable research, be it into wind, solar power. You can do donations towards bringing the cost of SAF down and therefore making it more widely used.
Exactly.
You can support sustainable products. So Bridgetown through the Emerge Group, for example, we contribute to wind and solar projects in Chile, in India and the Philippines, hydropower projects in Fiji and Brazil.
That's really interesting.
And cook stove projects in Kenya. So if you provide people with cook stoves and not burning fossil fuels to make their dinner. Now, again, that sounds like a really, really small thing.
But the impact.
But the impact is tangible. So I'm much more in favour of people looking at what they can do that makes an actual difference as opposed to planting a tree, waving a flag and saying, I've offset my carbon.
Yeah, exactly. We need to do things that actually have an impact. And,
Exactly.
You know, I'm intrigued. The cook stoves in Kenya. I haven't come across that or heard about that. Can you give us a little bit more about that?
It's purely providing people with a alternative to burning fossil fuels, be it wood, be it coal, to make a fire, to cook their food.
Simple.
So,
But
again, it's a very small thing. If we're looking at one household, but we're not. We're looking at this as a bigger picture. We're not just looking at it as one village in Kenya. This is a global thing. So if we can help people move away from doing that, then again, the carbon produced by having a fire in your house where you're cooking your food, that goes. So we're reducing the reliance on fossil fuels, and it is relevant to air cargo. We can't, as we keep saying, we can't change the fuel used in the aircraft. What we can do is try and make carbon savings elsewhere whilst we wait for the scientists to come up with a solution that we can then get on board with.
No, that's interesting. And I think we've kind of touched a little bit on sustainable aviation fuel, but I guess I'm intrigued to know your thoughts on where we are with SAF. I know that it's not widely available and it's high costs. Where do you think we are with it, and where do you think we're going to go, and how do we get to where we need to be with SAF?
That's a very big question. SAF's in its infancy. We're seeing it used on certain routes by certain carriers. It is expensive, but everything is when it starts. We can't escape that. There are people out there who are willing to pay to use the services operated by SAF. I appreciate them, but the large majority of people aren't willing to pay that increase. But SAF offers 80% reduction on emissions. That's enormous.
That's huge, right? And, you know, especially when we're talking about getting to this net zero by 2050, that's going to have a huge impact in us actually achieving that
well,
target.
Potentially it's the biggest change. Definitely we've seen in air cargo and probably in global logistics. That 80% reduction is enormous. So I see it coming down in price. The more money that goes into the research, the more that people get on board with using SAF, we will see the prices come down. And there's going to be a sweet spot where they come down to a point that people are prepared to step up. And the more that it's used, obviously, same as everything, it will become cheaper.
Exactly.
So I think it's something that is a fantastic innovation. We're a long way from seeing it as a norm, but hopefully we'll get there. Realistically, SAF is the future. We know we're looking at electric aircraft. That will work for the short haul, and we're nowhere near seeing an electric aircraft. Same with hydrogen-powered aircraft. That will work for long haul, but we're a long way from seeing that coming in. SAF is here.
That's it. We've got something tangible right now, and how do we build on that and make that more widely available?
I think it's, like I said, it's the more it's used, the more the cost comes down. The more the cost comes down, the more it's used. And there's a very chicken and egg.
I was going to say it's a chicken and egg situation.
but there are some industries, and obviously it depends on the lanes that the alternative is offered on. Depends on the carriers that are prepared to do it. Well, I'm not going to talk specifics because I don't think that's fair, but there are a couple of carriers who are really pushing it on certain lanes. And hopefully we'll just see that snowball. It's going to be a long, long time before we see it across all carriers. It's going to be a long, long time before we see it across all routes. But the more we support it and the more we see it utilised, the quicker that will come.
Exactly. No, that's it's definitely interesting, and you're right. There's a few main carriers out there that are really pushing and supporting it, and I think it takes the kind of carriers that have the infrastructure to be able to kind of support and push it, and hopefully it's got to come from the top and trickle down, right?
100%. We're being really political here, not naming people, but it's. There's one in particular who have really taken this on and are really championing it. Again, across certain routes in a certain sector, but it's got to start somewhere. And
exactly.
that carrier is a well-known carrier, and it needs that name. So
it's a start.
It's a start.
Let's see where it goes.
Exactly.
And are there any other technologies that we haven't discussed that you think are going to play an impact into sustainability?
There are lots of things. I mean, you mentioned Amazon earlier on. Amazon are looking at drone deliveries.
I've seen that.
And they're obviously battery powered. So it's a fantastic future view that also reminds me of science fiction films where we've got robots delivering parcels, but that's something AI is going to provide us with a lot of change. We can look at optimization of loads. I think it's just embracing the technology, and it's looking at every day there are new developments, and can we adapt that? Can we utilize that? Is that going to obviously save us money, but B, is it going to help us provide a more sustainable supply chain? And it's just remaining agile. And it goes back to the point I think we've touched on all the way through this, is talking, it's having collaboration. Yeah. It's everybody having that conversation and looking for the best utilisation of the technology we've got at our fingertips.
Absolutely. It is about collaboration, right? There's not one area of the supply chain that can drive sustainability on its own. It needs that kind of collaborative approach from airlines, from the airports, from freight forwarders, from the shippers, from everyone that's involved in that supply chain from A to B to kind of be a part of that conversation.
Exactly. And we talk about the supply chain. The supply chain doesn't exist. We talk about people who provide packaging.
Yeah.
We talk about hauliers, as you said, freight forwarders, carriers, handling agents. All of these are independent. So if everyone talks to each other, that can only be a good thing.
Yeah.
And B, we should see a bit more of a push towards a more sustainable supply chain.
Let's hope.
Fingers crossed.
And I guess, we kind of talked a little bit about you in the CILT forum. How have you been involved in kind of what the government regulations are, and can you touch a little bit on what the government or what regulations we're seeing coming in?
We don't push policy. The CILT is an independent organisation. It's an institute of logistics and transport. We just bring together minds within the industry. What are we doing today? We're not driving policy. I'm not qualified to drive policy.
No.
So, as much as I'd like to, unfortunately, people wouldn't listen to me as an individual. It's looking at what the government are trying to do. It's looking at what we can do as independent parts of the supply chain to maximise that. There is policy groups within the CILT who do try and push that more. But again, it's got to be something that works. And it's about listening to the people on the ground. So in the CILT, we can come up with great brainstorming sessions, but they may not be practical for people.
Yeah.
So it's listening to the people. What can you do? Okay, how does that fact fit in with what he does, what she does? How do we pull that together? And how do we get people talking about it? And that's what the ENS forum's really about. It's about making people have conversations. If we do that, then we're winning.
Exactly.
It's less policy and more about having people having the discussions that we want them to have.
That's it. And I think if we brainstorm and if we keep talking about sustainability and coming up with different ideas and sharing that knowledge and what one person is doing, how can we translate that? That's more effective than writing policy that may never ever be achieved.
It's, yeah, definitely 100%. And also, we can't change policy. That's not something I ever particularly want to get involved in. This is more about getting people together, getting people to have discussions, looking at what's changing in the world. How do we adapt that? How can we utilise that? And potentially, is that going to save us money as well along the line? So it's a much bigger conversation.
So I guess we've talked a lot about the small things we can do now and the changes that you're making kind of within your own organisation, and I guess the conversations that you're having as a wider part of the industry. Where do you think we can be in the next kind of 10 years?
That's a wonderful question, isn't it? Look, realistically, SAF is the future for air cargo. No shadow of a doubt. I'm hoping in 10 years' time we'll see a greatly increased adoption of SAF. I'm hoping that the cost has come down and made it more viable. We're probably going to see improved tech on aircraft, be it fuel dependency, different new aircraft coming out with less of a fuel dependency, potentially moving closer towards hydrogen electric powered planes. Digital solutions potentially that help us optimize loads. I think we're moving in the right direction. Where we're going to be in 10 years is very much dependent on the people in the industry today. And it's what can we do today to provide that future?
That's it, right? And we need to keep having that conversation and keep pushing towards that 10 year. If we just sit here and say, well, we're going to have X, Y, and Z in 10 years, just saying it right now is not going to...
Doesn't achieve it.
No. So it's the continual conversation and the continual putting things in practice.
Exactly. And I think people are having more conversations. Single-use packaging is now something that's not just spoken about in the supply chain, it's spoken about by people at home.
Yep.
People will go back to receiving internet orders from some companies and wonder why the box is as large as it is and tend to complain about that now. Great, let's keep having that conversation. It's a very small part of a supply chain, but if every part has those conversations, we'll see a change.
A bigger impact. You know, and there are different things happening all over the place. You know, I've seen that I think Hong Kong Cargo Airport are turning recycling uniform into reusable cups. And these small things that play an impact, having solar panels put onto airports and using solar power to power the terminals rather than, you know... But
again, this goes back to what we spoke about earlier about carbon offsetting isn't... Planting a tree is fantastic, but it's not solving a problem. Put some money into solar power and then you are seeing a change.
Exactly.
It's, again, I'm going to say small is beautiful. And there's a colleague at the CILT who will love the fact I keep saying this. But it is true. The small changes are the ones that will see the biggest impact further down the line.
Exactly. It's little things. You know, I was even reading an article about ULD manufacturing and how they're looking at building them with composite materials and how that will reduce the weight by 20 to 40% per ULD. Reducing the weight will then increase the fuel efficiency of the aircraft, and that will mean less fuel will be needed.
Which it does, as long as that's followed through, because the cynic in me says if we reduce the weight of a ULD, people will try and put more into a ULD and keep the same payload of the aircraft. Look, I think everything we do that's a positive step puts us on a better footing for the future. The fact, like I say, we are going to run out of fuel. And I like going on holiday, so I'd still like there to be a plane in the sky.
Too.
And we need to find a solution to this now, really.
Exactly.
We'd like to be there before the well runs dry and it becomes a panic.
Don't really want to get on a boat to go on my summer holiday and spend 2 weeks travelling.
Yeah, well, that will be it. Holidays are now cruises. just up and down the channel for a couple of weeks. But we do joke about it, but it's true. We love the fact, everybody loves the fact that you can jump on a plane and go anywhere in the world. And I think the world's become much more accessible in the last 30 to 40 years than it ever has been. And I'd like my kids to experience the same opportunities that I've experienced.
100%. You mean, I see it on the likes of TikTok all the time. People that do these day trips, they'll get on a plane, go to Amsterdam for the day from the UK and fly back in the same day. And you think, wow, we're at a point where you could just hop on a plane early morning, go to another country, spend the day there and hop back.
I see the same things. But again, from a sustainable point of view, they're saying, oh, look, I managed to get a plane ticket for 20 quid. You think, that's great, but how much carbon are we doing just so you produce this TikTok? Great that we can do it, but what can we do better? And how can we make this more of a sustainable future?
It's a good question. So, what do you think are the main obstacles in us achieving or becoming more sustainable over the next 10 years?
Well, the obvious ones are finances and technology. People don't want to spend any more money than they currently are. I understand that. I don't. We keep talking about cost of living crisis in the UK. Now, if I say we can change the carbon footprint of the supply chain instantly overnight, but it'll cost you all £100 more in your weekly shop, there's very few people who agree to that.
Yeah.
Very few people who can agree to that.
Exactly.
So that's the biggest thing. We need to make the changes that remain fiscally responsible, that give people the opportunity to get on board without causing financial hardship. But also, we need to find these solutions. We need to have people much smarter than me thinking of, right, this is what we could do with fuel, this is what we could do with the final mile delivery, this is what we can do with drone deliveries.
Exactly.
What can we do? It comes back to having the conversation, and it's having people getting on board because they can afford to get on board, and not getting on board because they have to.
Exactly, and we've got to think outside the box a little bit as well. I think
Exactly.
there's the creative outside of the box thinking. Especially when we talk about maybe final mile and drone deliveries. What can we do in terms of not the norm? How can we change things that bring us a more sustainable outcome?
I think, like I said, 24 years ago when I started, sustainability wasn't a conversation at all. The industry's changed beyond recognition in 24 years. I think the industry's grown up massively. We don't do all our meetings in pubs. We don't write our quotes on the back of a fag packet anymore. And we have matured as an industry. And I think that's fantastic. I think it's opened the doors to people with different views. It's opened the doors to people with different ideas. I think the generation that's coming through now have got a much more responsible view on sustainability, on environmental issues, as well as equality and various others. And this is great. And the more that we encourage these people into our industry, and the more that we encourage people to have these conversations. Look, I'm a dinosaur, so I need educating. And I like the fact that people are coming into the industry and educating me and opening my eyes to different things that we could do, different paths that we could take. And again, it comes back to let's keep talking.
Exactly, and that's kind of why, one, it's great to have you on the show and talk about sustainability, because I'm an avid supporter of the next generation into this industry, but also how can we learn and how can we share that knowledge and how can we do things differently? And I'm always interested in other people's perspectives. So, the fact that you touched on that and said, actually, we need the next generation who are thinking about sustainability more to kind of actually make maybe those that are older in the industry or have been here for a long time to sit up and think, yeah, actually, these are the things that we can do, or this is where we can have an impact.
Honestly, you said to me, where did my sustainability journey start? It did start 7-8 years ago, and I'm by no means an expert, and I don't pretend to be at all. And every day is a school day for me. I'm hearing about different things that people are doing. I can't make an enormous change that's going to change anything, even through the companies I work for. I can't make that massive change, but I can hear about it. I can have conversations about it. I find it all very, very interesting, especially technological advances. But I'm learning, and we are all learning. And if we open our minds to that, I think then we'll see a brighter future.
Exactly. I think if we stop being on that journey of learning, that's when things don't change.
Oh,
as
100%.
well.
And you've got to be open to learn from people 20, 30 years younger than you. Of course, people are going to have better ideas. Age isn't a barrier to having a good idea. It can be a barrier to listening to good ideas, and that's what we need to change.
So we've talked a lot about the small changes. If there was one piece of advice that you could give to any companies looking to be more sustainable, what would it be?
Achievable steps. You've got to start with achievable steps. Don't look at it as a big picture. Look at the small changes. So reduce your waste. If you can integrate SAF somewhere through, that'd be great. If you've got customers who are prepared to pay the premium, that's fantastic. Collaborate. Investment in innovation. Again, looking back at wind and solar. And utilise inland rail if you can. Electric vehicles if you can. If you can't, don't beat yourself up too much. Make the changes that work for you as a company, as an individual, and just stay across what the industry's doing. Stay across what options are out there, and just keep an open mind. Really,
that's it. And as we've said it many times, those small things that you can do will have a wider, bigger impact. So it's not about the things that you can't do. What are the things that you actually can do?
Exactly.
So obviously, I know that you're kind of you like the topic of sustainability, but I'm keen to know what innovation or what development that's coming or that you've seen most excites you for the future, Matt.
I can look at it with two hats. So SAF obviously excites me. 80% reduction in emissions. That's phenomenal. That's
huge,
massive. And if we can find that becomes a norm in air travel, be it cargo, be it passenger, that's great. That's phenomenal, and that's a massive, massive change. Hydrogen-powered aircraft fascinate me. I love the idea of it, but I can't escape the image of the Hindenburg. So I'm fascinated to see where this goes.
Just maybe not on it, just watch it from a distance.
I'll watch it from a distance. But again, electric aircraft for short-haul flights. In my mind, because I'm not a scientist and I'm not an expert, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Well, we can do it with cars. Why can't we do it with planes? I appreciate there's a bit more to it than that. But if we can do electric for short-haul flights,
exactly.
Again, that's going to make a massive difference globally.
Oh, 100%. You know, there's a lot of smaller cargo aircraft coming into the field now as well. You know, we've got the Embraer that have launched their cargo aircraft for short haul, for moving e-commerce. Potentially, if we've got these smaller aircrafts that are more fuel efficient for short distances that could be electrified, that could even be more of a game changer.
It could be absolutely massive. I'm excited to see what's going to come out that I haven't heard about or I haven't thought about. If you look at the changes in the industry in the last 24 years, that astronomical. I was still receiving pre-alerts by fax when I started. I was still doing manual customs entries.
Sorry, what's the fax, Matt?
Yeah, that's all right. We'll leave that one. But still doing manual customs entries, and all that changed. And you think, well, what is around the corner? Somewhere, someone is having a great idea right now. And that's probably going to be the most exciting innovation of the next 10 to 15 years. And that's what excites me. What's out there that we haven't seen?
The unknown.
Exactly.
What's coming in the future. So, Matt, how can listeners learn more about sustainable practices or get involved in the conversation?
Follow industry leaders. Follow organisations such as the Institute of Logistics and Transport. IATA quite regularly will put things out about a potential change in sustainability. Everyone's got the drive towards it. So IATA, follow IATA. The Cargo Sustainability Council, Clean Skies for Tomorrow. There are conferences and webinars all the time. So keep an eye on LinkedIn. So you've got events such as Sustainable Logistics Live, which will be in April in Leeds.
Okay.
That's pulling together people from the industry, from different sectors within the industry, all talking about what they're doing. Air Cargo Sustainability Summits, ICAO Environmental Forums. There's so much out there. Keep across any info that you can get, that you can learn from. Listen to people who are talking about it, and get involved in the conversation that way.
That's it, right? It's getting involved. I think that's the first step, is to get involved, have conversation with your colleagues.
Exactly.
Ask your, people that you work with, what are we actually doing to be more sustainable, and what impact can I play in that?
And don't be scared of the big questions. Don't be scared that people are going to talk to you about running an aircraft on sunflower oil. People don't have those conversations. It is about the small, beautiful changes you can make.
Brilliant. Well, Matt, it's been really fantastic talking to you about sustainability. I think I've taken away lots that I can kind of take back to my own organisation and say, actually, are we doing these small things to make the changes? Are there any lasting thoughts or anything else that you think is relevant for our listeners?
No, just keep an open mind. Like I said, keep an open mind. Look at the small changes. Look at small victories. You're not going to change the world overnight. No one is. But we can all pull together in the same direction. Then we're winning, aren't we?
Exactly. It's about the long-term journey and how we all collaborate and keep working towards that net zero, potentially in 2050.
Yes.
And lastly, Matt, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you or have a further conversation with you about sustainability, where can they find you?
Find me on LinkedIn, Matt Croser. Contact me on LinkedIn, and we can have a conversation.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, Matt. And I'm sure we'll chat at some of these events coming up about sustainability. I'm keen to learn more.
Thanks for having me.
A big thank you to Matt for sharing his insights on how we can collectively make our industry more sustainable. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out our previous one. And don't forget, we'll be back on the last Friday of every month. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, let us know in the comments. You can also follow me on TikTok and Instagram at That Air Cargo Girl for behind the scenes action, as well as on LinkedIn. See you next month.